Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of being contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
Hello and welcome to Console Shock, Retro and Modern Gaming Chat with me, Trev and Stu. How's it going, Stu?
It's going very well, Trev. How are you?
Yeah, you know what? I keep telling you about how there's a game that I started and then I leave it for ages. And then I don't know what it is, something I see a review of it or someone mentions it in a YouTube video and I end up going back into it and I end up absolutely hammering it until the end. And I did this, last year with Breath of the Wild. I did it recently with Red Dead Redemption 2, which I finished for a couple of weeks ago, or last week, actually. And I'm kind of getting that way now with another game. I started playing Metal Gear Solid 2. I started playing it many times over the last, it's an old game now, which is kind of crazy. 20 plus years it's been out. I always just bummed around in like the tanker part. Have you played that game, by the way?
I haven't. It's one of those games that I think I've tried to play it and the controls make absolutely no sense.
Oh, God, they're horrible. They're absolutely horrible.
Honestly.
Yeah.
So I've just put it down. Even like the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4 games, I've just like, hold on, the controls are just backward, and
you just can't get around them, can you? Those controls.
Yeah, and sneaking around games are not my cup of tea, really.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm not, to be honest. For me as well, it's not. Well, the Batman Arkham games have a degree of that, but it's a bit. You can kind of brute force your way through those bits, although sometimes it really forces you to. When it does like a stage where you just get insta-killed if you get discovered, even though it doesn't really, in reality, wouldn't really happen, but the game just really wants you to stealth a level. But for the most part, it's not too bad. But yeah, it's just a game that I've on and off since it came out, really. I've played, bits of on and off, but never really, thought, right, I'm going to friggin' complete this. And the funny thing is, I loved the first Metal Gear Solid. I got it when it came out on the PS1. Absolutely hammered it, and I was a lot younger then, so I had more time to be able to do that. But I remember when I got it, I just powered through it over a few days and completed it, and absolutely completed it 3 or 4 times in a row. Because you could get little fun stuff in the first one. You could get a tuxedo that Snake could wear. You could unlock the stealth suit. You could take photos of stuff and all kinds of fun things. But yeah, so I was a fan of like the series, but I wasn't like it wasn't. For some reason, I didn't want to run out and get a PS2 to play Metal Gear Solid 2, because for a time that was the only way you could play it until they made an Xbox version and a PC version. But yeah, obviously every now and then I try and dip into like emulating the PS2 version. I remember I tried to play the Xbox version. Actually, back in the day when the Xbox version came out, I had an Xbox. Tried to play it on there, just never. It wasn't that I didn't like it or anything. It just didn't grab me like the original did.
So what are you playing this version on then?
So I started. I was trying to figure out. I'm actually going to give it a go now. Especially now I've got these PC gaming handhelds. Maybe that's what I've needed. I've needed to come up to be able to play. I mean, it has been on the Vita. The HD collection came out for the Vita.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Weirdly, I never attempted to play it on that. But then I thought, sod it, I can get, I'll find a good version that I can play that will run really nicely, either on my Steam Deck or my Legion Go. Obviously, it's come out on the Switch now with the Master Collection, which I also have, funnily enough. But then I thought, you know what? I've got like PS3 emulation works great on my Legion Go. So I actually got the HD collection that came out for the PS3. I'm actually playing it via that, which emulates perfectly. And the controls work great. Well, obviously the controls are a bit janky, it's just the way they've been set up. But they work great in terms of, using a PC controller, and there's no glitchiness. It looks really good. I've got it on the nice big screen of the Legion Go, but handheld. And I started it a few months ago and just stopped about 4 or 5 hours in. And literally last night or yesterday, the bank holiday it was here then, for people watching in the future, well, everyone's going to be listening in the future. I started, I hammered it again for about another 5 or 6 hours, and I feel like I'm probably about halfway in or 2/3 in now, and it's pretty good. I've enjoyed it, but yeah.
So you're playing the PS3 version on the Legion
on
Go.
PC. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So there is a new version out, isn't there? The Master Collection, and I know that got a little bit of sort of so-so reviews.
Yeah, it's actually quite funny because I got it on the Switch, and I just haven't really, gotten into playing it on the Switch. And then I thought, you know what? Because I play my Steam Deck more than the Switch these days, I thought maybe I should just get it. Surely it's been out for a little while now, that Master Collection, a few months. Often games like that go and discount really quick. So I looked up, try and get a cheap key for it, and I found one. And I added it to my Steam, but it turned out what I paid for was just Metal Gear Solid 1. I didn't realise I wasn't buying it's the 3 games, isn't it, that's in the Master Collection?
That's right, yeah.
Yes. Maybe they put the PSP ones, I can't remember. But so I never had it. I'll probably end up playing the first game through that collection because I love the first game. So I didn't. I ended up not getting it for the Steam Deck. I could have set up a PS2 emulator and played the PS2 version and gone through all of that.
No, played because I think it was on sale on the Xbox 360 store a while ago. So I think I do own it on that. So I could play it. But I don't know. It's, what you're talking about sort of mirrors my thoughts really about the controls are quite a little bit odd and I wouldn't mind. I don't know. Sometimes they need to. It's the same as like Metroid or Metroid Prime on the GameCube.
Oh god, that's horrific now to go back to.
Exactly, it's a brilliant game. 10 out of 10, but it's like playing it completely the wrong way round.
Yeah, your brain is just not wired to use those controls now. Yeah,
exactly. So I remember at the time thinking, oh yeah, these controls are good. Oh, this is great fun, and getting quite far in the game. But then actually now it's. So I'm just thinking I just might find it a step too far. So
I wouldn't say it's slightly. Yeah, I don't think it's as difficult as janky early FPS controls, 2-stick FPS controls. It's not as annoying as that. And I've got a little bit of muscle memory still floating around from hammering the first game when I was a kid. And the controls are largely identical to the first game. Very heavy on the triggers, you see. It's still not great. I don't think the later ones really control any better.
I got a guy that when I run PlayNation games, a guy who used to work there, Ollie, his name was. He used to do speed runs of Metal Gear Solid 4, and he could. Probably some screaming at the screen or at the phone, but I think he could do it in like an hour and a half or an hour and 40 minutes. So I don't know what the record is. It was something like that. I'm not saying he did in that time, but I was like, wow, you completed the whole game in like this amazing time. And it, just knew all the paths to go and where to hide, where to make up time and things like that. Incredible. It was absolutely phenomenal. But does the Metal Gear Solid 2, does that have those huge, great big, cutscenes? And
it does, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You'd have to skip them all to do a speed run, yeah.
I hate cutscenes.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's probably a reason why I haven't really been able to hammer it before, because we've talked about this, haven't we? I quite like having. I will play like story-based games. I'll probably play them more often now. I've got a Steam Deck and handhelds. Can play those big epic games that are kind of restricted to the Xbox and the PC. As in, basically to watch it on a big screen. Handhelds didn't really have sort of ports of these until recently. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid 2, it's not something you can kind of, if you're trying to watch something on TV and you've got this in your hand, it's kind of difficult to really zone out to the game. And maybe, when you're trying to do two things at once, because you've got to be, you do a little bit of whatever the mission is, and you've got to watch a cutscene, and you really have to kind of pay attention to them. So it's difficult.
Honestly, I can't be bothered. I've so many games I've completed, and I've genuinely really, really enjoyed them, and I've literally skipped every cutscene. And it's just like, right, on to the next bit. Where have I got to go? Who have I got to kill? What have I got to, defeat? And that's the enjoyment out of it. And some convoluted story that, you've got to do this, and then this happens, and then that, and then there's a... And people sort of talk to me, oh, yeah, I know, but what about that twist in the... No idea. I don't even know who the character, what his name was. I've got no clue. And so many games... I've just skipped through them, and the only ones that I think I generally enjoy the story is something like Grand Theft Auto, or Red Dead, or something like that, where it's a pretty simple, or it's more of like a fun story, and there's no, I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, that's probably why it's so easy to. That's why I love playing, like career mode in EA Sports FC, because I can have a football match on in the background, or even a movie on in the background, or a TV show, and I could just play this on like the Switch, and I haven't got to really concentrate. I haven't got to watch cutscenes. Yeah, there's menus you've got to get around to get to the next match, to and all that stuff. But you can literally, I could just zone out and go into like a Zen state. Whereas there's not many sort of action games, where you can really. This is a game you've already completed, so you don't really need to know the story. Sometimes you can do that, or retro games. You can just kind of just zone out and play those, which is probably why they appeal so much.
Well, that's like last year, and actually the start of this year. What was it? Vampire Survivors. That
is one of those. Yeah,
I love putting that on, and it's almost you get in a trance like state, and it's sort of quite relaxing, and you really get into it, and actually I think what are you doing, and my partner Justine, it's just a game you just sit in the middle of the screen, and you just destroy everything around you, and I go I know, but I like it, and I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense, really, because you're doing stuff, and you want to obviously unlock more things and get further and get more gold, or get more achievements out of it.
Yeah, it's kind of like a gacha type game that just gets very addictive. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and I think I really enjoyed that last year, and I just bought the new. There's a new Contra DLC for it, which I bought a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah,
and that's really good. So I've been playing a little bit of that when I get an opportunity, but I've
played the new Contra game, Contra Operation Galuga, I think it's called. Which apparently is actually a remake of the original Contra. I didn't realise that. I thought it was just a new game. But it's literally a remake of the NES game, and it's actually good.
You were telling me about that, so I've actually downloaded the demo.
Yeah, it's a bit expensive though. It's like £30. I'm like, I don't want to pay £30 for a 2D platformer. I'm going to wait for it to go on sale. It's one of those ones where you feel like this is a sort of game that'll be £5 in like a year. So yeah. I
100% agree with you there. I'm thinking, but those types of games, Trev, I'm just no good at them. Honestly,
either am I. You just got to keep playing them until you get better. And you can there's difficulty. That there is a difficulty setting in this one. You could probably dial that down a little bit.
I want novice or something, or real basic, because I just watching sort of people play these things online, and I'm absolutely rubbish at them.
It's nowhere near as hard as the originals. Like the first two NES games, and especially the Mega Drive game, are like brutal. Absolutely, you have to cheat, basically. You got to put the Konami code in to get the 30 lives, and even then, you're definitely going to run out of them. But yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, talking, I guess, of things that have lots of lives. Maybe it used the Konami code, in fact, in its own way. Something that we actually missed a little bit. We're kind of making up for it now. I don't know how I didn't think to talk about this sooner, but it's 2024, and it is actually the 40th anniversary of the Apple Macintosh. It was actually in January, right at the end of January is when the original 1984 Macintosh was released. And
that famous advert, wasn't it, at the Super Bowl?
Yeah, the 1984, the ad based on 1984, the book, directed by Ridley Scott, that advert, actually. And it is an incredible advert. You should go and watch it, the people that are listening that maybe haven't. But yeah, I think I'll make it fairly clear that I'm a really big fan of the Mac platform. It's kind of my favorite computer platform. I mean, probably of all time. I mean, a lot of people who love the Amiga might be like absolutely clutching their pearls right now, having heard that. But, I've been using a Mac probably in terms of actively using it as a daily driver way longer than I ever did an Amiga. Amiga had a few years in the sun, really, in the 90s, and then kind of died as a commercially viable platform. And it's been kind of a hobbyist thing, really, since then. It's certainly not something, well, I'm sure there are people that have upgraded it to, crazier levels and maybe do use it for everything that they do on a computer, but I've never really been interested in doing that with the Amiga. To me, it's permanently a sort of a 90s kind of computer that I like to play old 90s games on, and that's where it is. Whereas the Mac is my preferred, computer for doing everything apart from gaming on, and it has been since I got my first one in 2005. So for me, it's actually coming up to my personal 20th anniversary of being kind of a fan of the Mac and being a full-time Mac user. And weirdly, what triggered it a little bit was I actually had a look through some of my old copies of Macworld. Again, when we've talked about magazines, I mentioned that the last sort of magazine that I actively bought and that was computing or video game related was Macworld. That was for a period of about 2005 to 2008-ish. And after that, I just started getting my news, off the internet, really. And I feel like there was a need for me to spend £6 on a magazine each month. But so it was sort of nearly 4 years that I've got back issues of. And I was looking at the first one that I bought was May 2005. And it really made me think, like, that is just over 20 years from the original Mac coming out. And you just think, like, that first 1984 128K Macintosh versus the middle of the road 2005 Mac, which would be like an iMac G5 or a PowerBook G4, and they are absolutely completely on different planets to each other. The leap is insane. You've got something that can just basically is an isolated computer, black and white graphics, GUI with a mouse and a keyboard, but a very primitive one. And you're largely really only going to use the 128K original Mac for writing documents, maybe doing some drawing, playing very basic games. Obviously you could do things like HyperCard and create basic software and multimedia, but that's it. You're probably not going on any kind of internet. Certainly not the kind that we think of. Maybe you connect to BBSs and things that you could also do here on, like, Spectrums and Commodore 64s. You'd do that. But God, jumping 20 years to 2005, you've got a computer that pretty much would look like the ones we have today. So when you compare like a 2005 Mac to a 2024 one, certainly like maybe a PowerBook G4 to a MacBook Pro, they probably look pretty much the same. The PowerBook G4 is a bit chunkier. The screen bezels, well, actually, I think they're a bit thinner on the PowerBook G4.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think they're a bit thinner, but the screen would be a bit darker and a bit duller. but you'd be doing most of the same things on that you do now. You just do them a bit better and a bit, with more colours and higher resolution and maybe a bit quicker. Like you could watch movies on the PowerBook G4. You would have done that back in the day. You'd go on the internet. You could do all kinds of multimedia. You could game on it. That's pretty much what you do with a MacBook Pro now.
What I was sort of thinking about is, the Mac's always had a sort of a lineage from the beginning to the end, and you sort of touched upon it, not the end, modern day. It's always been a machine for creatives to use, and that was where it was originally sort of positioned as, is
that's right.
Machine for desktop publishing. You could.
It's where it found its success really in the 80s. Yeah.
Exactly, and the use of sort of the mouse and other computers obviously had mice before, but compared to its biggest rival, obviously the PC compatible, it was user friendly wise, it was leaps and bounds ahead. And I would actually argue you can still see a lot of DNA from the original Mac to the MacBook Air that I've got today.
Absolutely.
There's so much that goes from one to the other, and I think now I don't know, Trev, you might disagree with this, but I think if I were to get a Mac, and
I disagree.
I haven't said it yet. I think I'll be able to use it absolutely fine because I know how to use my modern Mac.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, if you were going to, we've talked about, we've got actually episodes going back. You can look in what we talked about before on Console Shock of collecting old Macs. We had an episode with Dan Wood, who's also into Macs. Now he's also, mainly famous for doing Amiga stuff, but we had him on and we talked about old Macs. But yeah, I mean, God, if I gave you or if you went and got a Power Mac G4, which is a line of Macs that ran from about 2000 to 2004, and you could probably put the maximum OS that could handle, so like macOS 10.4, actually 10.5 had run on it as well. You could get whatever the latest version of Word that would work with that, like just probably about 2008 or something, might even be later than that. You could put iTunes on it, so you got all your music. You can watch DVDs with the DVD drive. It'd probably be able to handle sort of medium quality video files, MP4s. You could have a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, Bluetooth. In fact, probably the current versions of those sort of devices would work on a Mac and a Power Mac G4, and connect it to a monitor. You might have to deal with some adapters, especially if you've got a monitor that's totally brand new and it's HDMI only or USB-C. You could probably get some dongles that'll feed that into a Power Mac G4, but I don't think you would have too much trouble. In fact, we've touched upon this before as well, but I've used like Macs for that sort of 90s computer gaming or PC gaming, because a lot of those famous PC games like Doom and Monkey Island and and all of those had Mac versions, and they're actually a lot easier to get running than fiddling around with DOS, on an old vintage PC. Yeah. So they're actually not a bad option for that, and I've done that myself. You could probably be, wouldn't have too much trouble doing that either. I mean, have you had a lot of experience with older Macs? We talked about it before, but I've got my G4 Titanium. Oh wow, they're amazing. My favourite Mac ever, the G4 Titanium.
So I'm actually thinking, I need to get that set up and have another go on that. But so I got a few games sort of running on that, but I think I need to sort of get back into it. But
a really good example as well that you've touched upon there is like the Titanium hasn't really aged that much. If you put it next to a MacBook Pro, the screen bezels are thin. Okay, probably the mouse pad, the trackpad is probably the thing that would give it away. It's very small. But the keyboard is very slick. The color scheme it uses is not a big, huge beige box. It's very thin, quite light, made of metal, titanium, obviously. So it hasn't aged much in terms of the design. I think it still looks great.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a good-looking machine. But I'll say my only sort of complaint about it, it looks a little bit worn out.
The paint.
Sense.
Yeah, the paint is terrible. The paint flakes off them. And,
the paint, and I think the titanium is quite a soft metal.
So, you can take a few dings for real. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So, but I'm not looking for one in pristine condition. It is what it is, and it does the job. And I've put myself an SSD in it, and that works really well. So I'm really sort of happy with the way that it works. But I mean, another thing sort of I've noticed about sort of the Mac is I'm looking at here a photo of Steve Jobs, and the mouse has only got sort of one button.
Yeah,
and it's all about sort of keeping it simple. But and I'm a little bit sort of surprised. Changed. What's the reason changed. for the Mac having the original one having such a small screen? Was that
the original 1984 Mac? It would pretty much be, the a fairly cheap CRT would be a smaller CRT. Probably from a design point of view, it means it was supposed to be an appliance like a toaster or like, some kind of just thing that you could just sit somewhere and jump on and jump off without having to be a scientist to know how to use it. So they wanted it to be small. It always was going to be small. So that obviously dictated that the screen would be fairly small. It's probably about as small as they wanted to get and have it still be fairly comfortable to work with. And of course, large CRTs, really a TV would be about as big as you'll get in 1984. You wouldn't really have anything bigger than 20 inches.
It's unusual, really. It's quite a small screen, really.
Yeah, and, very high resolution for the day as well. Very sharp. Obviously, by today's standards, it would be quite pixelated. But back then, considering DOS was 320 by 200, the Mac was pretty much double that. You would be using 640 by 480 wouldn't become super common until the 90s. So the Mac was already within that realm in the early 80s or the mid 80s. So yeah, I mean, I have gotten one of those classic boxy all-in-one Macs. I've got a Macintosh SE, which is a few years down the line. It's from 1989.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of an evolution of that original 1984 Mac. It's a little bit more powerful. Still got the same size screen, same resolution, really. I need to. It's in the back of my mind to sort of upgrade it a bit more and make it a bit more capable. Trouble is they're very prone to the CRTs do fail on them, and the caps need replacing, and all of that is well past what I'm able to do. There's that to consider as well. But they are very iconic machines. Yeah.
I've always wanted to get a Mac sort of classic, not to actually use, but to sort of have as it's like an ornament. I wouldn't mind sort of finding like a broken one. So if you ever come across one that sort of doesn't work, the caps are fried, I'd buy that just to have it sort of sitting on a shelf. And I think that would look sort of pretty cool, really.
Yeah. I mean, I've had an interest in. Like I said, I've got one of those classic all-in-one Macs. I've got an SE. I don't want to keep it working, so I can mess around more with it. I mean, if I had more room, I'd probably get a few more of them because I think they're cool. I'll probably. I mean, it's the first Mac, the 1984 128K Macintosh, is kind of useless. The RAM it's got barely had enough RAM to do what it was supposed to do when it came out. And literally, I think that came out in January, and I think in September of that year, 1984, they already released a Mac Plus or a Macintosh 512K. So they quadrupled the RAM, and that basically meant it was really kind of usable at that point. It was a lot faster with that amount of RAM. You could do a lot more. You'd have to swap your disks as much just to be able to get something running. Also, there's no hard drive at this point in time. You're relying on floppy disks like an Amiga, really, an Amiga without a hard drive, of course. So that initial one is a little bit useless. But the 512K, if you're aiming for you want to get one of those very early Macs, that would be a better bet if it's one you want to fiddle around with and muck around on.
I don't want it to work, Trev.
Oh, there's a ton of them on eBay, mate.
Yeah. I'm looking for one that's broken for parts only, to sit on the shelf, and then I'll go, oh look, there it is.
Have the other half complain about it.
Exactly. Collecting dust. That's what I want. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those early years, while we're sort of on that sort of subject, the Mac wasn't hugely successful to start off with. It didn't fly off the shelves and start selling like hotcakes and take over. No one was saying at the time, people were saying it was revolutionary and the GUI is amazing, but they weren't saying this is killing everything and everyone's buying them. So they're very expensive. It wasn't until really desktop publishing started that the Mac really took off. And you could even argue they didn't really, really take off until Jobs left or got sacked, basically. Well, some people would even argue that it wasn't until the Macintosh II, which came out in 1987, which was basically looked like a PC. It was just a big beige box, pizza box, that a monitor sat on top of, which was the first Mac that was designed to be upgraded, put upgrade cards in, and had a color display. That it really sort of broke out of its limitations. Yeah.
Trev, obviously I did some research for this episode, because I'm not really sort of knowledgeable about sort of the Mac, but what I always associate with the Mac is that the original ones, got a real iconic look, and then it sort of turned into, it just looks like a PC box. And
essentially,
Yeah, it just looks like a PC box. And then it turns into the iMac, the iBook. And
it almost is reverting back, isn't it, to that initial Mac?
Yeah,
really,
so it goes from really stylish and then to, let's just look like every other PC out there. But obviously it's an Apple, it's a Macintosh. And then it turned into this, really colourful, sort of funky designed, and that's when it sort of got its, it sounds funny to say this, but it got its mojo back, really, and became, what it is today, really.
Yeah, it's had a kind of an odd kind of history in terms of how the line, the Macintosh line, expanded and contracted and then expanded again. You obviously had that first 128K Mac, that it was just that, and there was nothing else. That got upgraded to 512K. But then it was really upgrading that single, that basic all-in-one design until the Macintosh II came out in '87, and that introduced the beige pizza box with a monitor that you could plunk on top. But like you say, looked like a PC. The sort of the original all-in-one Mac became a sort of a companion to that. So there was kind of two Mac lines were then running side by side at that point. The all-in-one black and white Mac, the classic, would be called the classic Mac line and would be the entry level. And the big box one would be the big power, workstation, what you would now think of as a Mac Pro. And that would then follow its own path of being upgraded. They still worked on the same system software. They were still the same platform, but they would diverge dramatically. One would be a lot cheaper and be more entry level, and then the other one would be for power users. That's essentially, we still have that, but that kind of went a bit nuts when we got to the 90s. We had a laptop that was introduced at the end of the 90s, literally 1989. We had the first Macintosh Portable, which was basically a luggable. It wasn't really a laptop. It was freaking huge, but important because it led to, ultimately the laptops that we have now on the Mac line. But that literally 2 years later, in 91, they shrunk the Mac Portable down to a tiny laptop, which is basically defined the laptop form factor for the entire industry with the PowerBook 100. So that's a very important milestone Mac as well. I've got a PowerBook 100, but it doesn't work, which is annoying. But I'm really happy I've got it. Maybe one day somewhere I'll be able to get them. I think the caps are that story. The caps are buggered and all that stuff.
Just put it on your shelf, Trev. Just put it on your shelf.
Yeah, that's what you want to do, isn't it? So
just put it on your shelf, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, they're a great looking machine actually. So yeah,
Trev, one sec. I can hear you typing. I don't know if your mic's really close to the
I was clicking on what actually, funny enough, on my Mac, a window was opening up, so I just closed it. But yeah, wow, I didn't know that would pick up my Apple AirPods that I'm using for this to record. You had those two lines, and then we got to the 90s, and then it kind of went a bit berserk at that point. We had those laptops that we just talked about, and then we had the desktops would expand. And actually, the original all-in-one box, the classic Mac line, would kind of be killed off. When we got to 94 was when they officially got killed off. And it was just the pizza box Macs were the only ones. But they would then have like an entry-level, a mid-level, and a pro line. They were called Quadra, Performer, and Centris. So it got very confusing for the consumer. Which one do I get? They had different prices. It wasn't really clear which one was meant for who. So it did become a bit of a mess. There was different lines of PowerBook that had different numbers, like the PowerBook 140 and 160 and 180. And they kind of went, there was black and white ones and color ones. There was the PowerBook Duo, which was a very small, thin and light variant of the PowerBook that would connect to a dock to make basically a desktop Mac, which was actually kind of cool. But again, you're adding more confusion, and it was getting a bit mental at that point.
So what was it? Because I watched this video about the history of that, and that what I found very confusing, because at the moment I think the Mac line is very organized, very clear, very you know what sort of machine it's the Air if you want to buy the entry level one, and then the Pro if you want to buy the Pro one. But there it seemed like they had some which just had a different name, but it was the same computer on the inside, and I'm sure it made sense to someone, but it seemed like a really confusing sort of time for the Mac, really.
Yeah, I mean, this was the point in time. Obviously, Steve Jobs had gone. We touched upon that. And the Mac line just absolutely bloated. But also Apple doing printers and scanners and even digital cameras, and they were creating all kinds of stuff that wasn't really selling when we got to the very mid-90s. And yeah, the Mac line had the PowerBook, the laptops, and it had the desktop Macs, which were the Quadras and the Performers and the Centris lines. Then we had also the Power Mac was added to that, which was like a super powerful Mac that would be the workstation, super pro user one. That was another one that was thrown in there. So yeah, it was getting very bloated with all these different models, the other gadgets that Apple was selling. And
at one point there was also what was it? Not the fake ones, the clone Macs.
Oh yeah. They actually licensed macOS to other manufacturers, and they started building clone Macs. I think Power Macs was one of the main ones. Now
in 2024, it seems crazy that they would have.
It does.
You can imagine a clone MacBook Air or something like that. It seems absolutely ridiculous to even think that someone would do that.
Yeah, I mean it's the mid 90s with Apple, the Star Macs. There we go. That was one of the companies that made clones. It's an absolute different planet. In those last few years before Steve Jobs came back, and we basically took us to where we are now with Apple. They were trying all kinds of stuff, and the thing with those clones they were often more powerful and cheaper than the ones that Apple made.
Yeah.
So they were kind of, cannibalizing their own market. Steve Jobs killed those as soon as he came back into the company, and obviously that was the right decision. Very cool for consumers that they could, buy a cheaper Mac. But yeah, that didn't help the situation. Also, the operating system was getting very bloated and old and was struggling to keep up. The Mac systems software, as it was called, until it became macOS with version 7.5. That was kind of, moving along fairly well in the 80s after the first Mac came out. Obviously, it was, the PC platform didn't have, the IBM sort of platform didn't have anything like it really to the same high level of advancement. You had like the first versions of Windows, which weren't that great until you got to 3.0, and that's basically.
I think that's something we've really got to touch upon, because you mentioned sort of the Apple and obviously the operating system. That was really sort of the difference, and if you put the GUI for the Mac against next to Windows 3.1, was it really sort of night and day between what you could do on one and I mean I used Windows sort of back in the day, and then it wasn't really till Windows 95 that came out. It was like, oh, actually, this looks, I know what I'm doing with this, and
yeah. I mean, for me personally, I didn't really use Macs. Macs weren't common at all in the UK. Certainly not where I grew up. I didn't see one in the flesh until, to be honest, I think I saw one until about 2001. I think actually, I probably saw them in the background of my high school. In the art department had a couple of iMac G3s. So that was, so we're talking, 1997, 98 time. 98 was when the iMac G3 came out. The sort of the famous, looks like a big jelly bean with a screen kind of deal. So that was the first time that I saw one in the flesh. I don't really think I wasn't a fan of Apple at that point. I wasn't particularly interested in trying to use it, but we had them at my school. In America, they're kind of, Apple did a big push to schools to try and get Apple IIs. The Americans are very nostalgic for Apple IIs that are of our kind of age. And then later it would have been Macs, but we didn't have anything. We'll see the BBC Micro completely took over schools, didn't it? And then Acorn was part of that as well. So, and then basically PCs really.
I actually found on my in the last episode I was talking about the PC I bought, and that's actually got a DVD drive, and then I found a load of old CDRs, and I don't know if I mentioned, but I lived in Canada for a year after university, so back in about 2002, and one of the photos of me, obviously looking a lot younger, I was in this house where I rented a room. The lady that owned it had an Apple Mac, and I don't know what it is. So I'm going to dig out that photo and try and sort of send it to you, and you can go, you can tell me what one I actually used sort of back 20 odd years ago. And so I would sort of use it, like maybe for 20 minutes in the evening to sort of check my emails or see what was going on back in the UK or whatever. And so I'd use it every now and again. And so I do remember using the Mac, and I think all I remember knowing was, to get on the internet, you had to press on Safari, and then that's all I'd really use it for. So there was no sort of productivity or gaming. It was purely, press Safari, then type in BBC or whatever I was looking for really at the time.
Yeah. It probably would have been sort of like a G3 or a G4 if we're talking.
I think that's what I think.
Early 2000s, yeah. I mean, that was probably where, it would have been around that era that I started using Macs. The first one I actually properly used was a titanium PowerBook G4. The IT department in my school had one.
So that's what made you get it, was the IT department had it and you liked the look of it, or?
Well, that's the first time I saw, I think, an Apple laptop in the flesh. And I thought, wow, I thought it looked amazing. It looked so futuristic, and they were playing a DVD on it, and I was like, oh my god, wow, watch a movie. And again, Macs pioneered having optical drives in laptops and later DVDs in laptops. So it was absolutely mind blowing that you could do this. I didn't need any additional graphics hardware to be able to play a DVD. The G4 chip in the titanium, could just do it. It had like multimedia instructions and acceleration. So it could play just a DVD straight away. But yeah, I remember I borrowed it for a few hours from the IT department. I was doing an IT A level, so that meant I could kind of get away with asking for that stuff, and they'd trust me with it. And I remember I used to just spend hours just mucking around on it. We didn't have Wi-Fi at school, so I couldn't really go on the internet. I don't know if I tried to plug in an Ethernet cable into it, but I think I was just messing around on trying DVDs on it and writing documents and playing around with the built-in software that it had. But that was genuinely like, this is an incredible bit of kit. But obviously, I was like 18. I didn't have the money to kind of buy myself anything like that. A titanium PowerBook G4 would have been over $2,000, in the UK, which is, you could nearly even double that in today's money, like, over 20 years ago, only 25 years ago. And yeah, that was it really. I played around with that G4. And didn't really, try and make a goal for myself to buy one. I had PCs at home that I was perfectly happy with. The tipping point for me was I started going to uni in 2004, and I wanted to get a laptop. I was doing a multimedia degree, and I was going to use some of my student loan to pay for it. And I distinctly remember buying something from Curry's or Dixon's, I can't remember which one, and it was some crappy like HP thing that I thought looked okay. And there was just something about it I didn't like. It was a bit clunky and a bit ugly, and I don't know why I picked it, but I think it might have been the price. And I was like, yeah, I don't really like this. And I ended up taking it back like a couple of days later. And I was kind of bummed out. I was like, what bloody laptop am I going to get then? There's nothing that sticks out to me, and I don't know what I don't know what it was, but something. Actually, you know what? It might have been in that same Curry's. Looking in with the laptop displays, I saw an iBook G4, and it was the only Mac that they had. It was absolutely surrounded by on all sides by random Wintel laptops, but it just stuck out to me. And it had, I remember reading the little acrylic that was next to it that, told you what specs it was. A lot of that didn't mean anything to me because I didn't know what a G4 was. Is that like a Pentium? Is it better? Is it worse? I didn't know about power that Macs used, Power PC chips. I didn't know how they related to Intel chips. It had macOS X Panther. And I was like, what's that? Is that Windows? Is that some kind of, its version of Windows? I was aware that they're different. I wasn't so naive about Macs that I didn't know, that they were a different platform to Windows, and you're not using Windows, and you're not like, you can't just run a Windows thing on a Mac by default. I'm aware that it was like an Amiga, and like an Amiga was to a PC. I was aware that was how they relate to each other. And yeah, I just thought, I'm going to look into this. Actually, this looks really cool. And yeah, I ended up buying an iBook G4.
Is that the white one you got, or?
Yeah, it was the white one. They obviously don't make an equivalent to I guess the MacBook Air is probably the closest thing to what the iBook was. By this point in time, in the early mid 2000s, Apple had established a Pro line and a consumer line of computers. The consumer line would be the iBook laptops and the iMac desktops, and the Pro line would be the PowerBook G4 laptops and the PowerMac desktops. And you knew which one was which because the consumer lines weren't made out of metal; they were kind of plastic. Basically, they were both white. This time you'd have the iMac G5, which is the all-in-one iMac, that was white. The iBook G4 was white. The Pro line were in metallic casing. The PowerBook was in an aluminium case at this point, and so was the PowerMac G5, which is the top of the line Mac at that point. But yeah, I got it, and that was basically what turned me into the sort of devoted sort of Mac fan that I still am to this day. And it was funny because Macs still weren't nowhere near. This is 2005. We're nowhere near popular in the UK to the degree that they are now. I was the only person in my multimedia degree that had one. I'd get the piss taken out of me. They'd be like, what are you doing with that stupid little toy? And the weird thing is, I converted loads of them into getting Macs. But by the end of that degree, it still weren't that many, but about another 3 or 4 of them had bought a Mac of some kind because they thought that I kind of converted them. I didn't go out of my way to do it. I wasn't this obnoxious Mac like cult person like you hear about. People just ask me, what's that? That's really cool. And
Trev,
people used to ask me, go on, yeah.
I'll say, were you like the Mac flasher?
The Mac flasher? I'm a bit worried about. Does that mean you get You get your knob out when you use.
Well, that was sort of the bad joke, really. Yeah, or flashing your Mac. No, I can't imagine you did.
Going into Costa and doing that whole hipster thing. I'm not sure that was a thing then, but yeah, I got to a point as well. There was other people that weren't on my course, but were sort of, in the uni. They would ask a few people that bought a Mac and they didn't know how to install, so they wanted to get a dodgy copy of Photoshop or Microsoft Office. And I'd figured all that stuff out, how to do that by that point. And my lecturers would know, oh yeah, you need to ask Trev. He's got a Mac. He's got all that set up on his, because they wouldn't know. They'd be used to using Windows PC. So I became like, I'll kind of end up teaching people how to use it. Because there was a lot of people that just bought it because they liked the look of it. They didn't really have any interest in learning how. So
that's my issue with it, because I remember I've always had sort of PCs since I was 16 or whenever, and what I liked about them was you get the software and there was you need to get this, or you need to download that, you need to and I would always find a website to download something. It'd always be like the PC version and there wouldn't be a Mac version. So then that was always my. I think I'm not like this anymore, because when I was younger, I was always trying to get things for free or something like that, bits of software, and there was never a.
You're a pirate, Stu. You're a filthy pirate.
No, exactly. And then I was like, well, if I want to do these things on a Mac, I don't know where to get the Mac version of that from, or the Mac version of this one. It was a little bit too much of a what's it called, learning curve to achieve that. And so I always went down the route of going, well, actually, I like to have a PC, and that's what I knew where everything was. I knew how it all worked, and I'm not saying it was better than a Mac, or I'm sure they've both got their own sort of benefits over each one, and but that was always my sort of rationale. But I thought, actually, it's going to be really hard to get onto that. How do I find that bit of software to burn this or do that, or combine this?
Good point. That was always something that I was concerned about. I was like, how am I going to, all this stuff I do on my PC, can I do any of that? And I, to be honest, fairly easily I was able to find the bits that I saw by on the PC. Obviously word processing is, as being a student, then I could get the student versions of Microsoft Office, which were like super cheap, and Photoshop and stuff like that I needed for my degree, and just in my general hobby stuff that I did, downloading torrents and things like that. There was Mac versions of that to use to do all that with as well. Like I still download TV shows and stuff. Well, I still do really, but even more so then when there was no Netflix or anything. There was ways of doing that and ways to play those files, and I would watch DVDs on it. I didn't have I had a DVD player, but I found it was better to do it on my Mac. I got the cable for that to plug it into my TV. So I was able to use it as a DVD player to burn DVDs. I used it for that as well. There was some games that I played on it, getting emulators going on it. I was able to do that. I was able to sort of basically figure out how to do everything on it within a matter of weeks, I think. But God, I mean, if we're talking about the software, macOS X, if we're talking 2005, it felt like a giant leap over, it would have been Windows XP. Then that was probably the thing that when I showed people the Mac, that was the first thing that they would comment on. They'd be like, "Oh, this looks nice, doesn't it?" And what they meant was like the font, the system font, and the everything's shaded. The buttons are shaded and have 3D sort of shading to them, and the skeuomorphic look of everything, and and the simplicity, and everything is nice and clean. It was just, I mean, that was probably one of the things that impressed me the most, was really the operating system. It got out of your way and it didn't crash. And there are a few things that you have to get used to. I mean, using things in one thing, when you use Windows, your brain is wired to want everything to fill the screen, which things do by default on a Windows PC, but not necessarily on a Mac. When you've got a Word document open, it maybe just will take up the amount of space it needs to take up, and you can still see your desktop behind it. So when I later on would go on to work for Apple, or work in the Apple store, people would come in and that would drive them nuts. They'd be like, "Oh, I'm working on like Microsoft Word, but like, there's my document, but I can still see like, the menu bar and the dock at the bottom. When I had my PC, I would be able to just go like fill the screen, and I'd show them how to do that, but I'd be like, you don't actually need to fill the screen. You're not seeing any more of the document. It might make you feel like you're in the application, I guess, if that's all you can see is the application and nothing else. But it's kind of a weird. It's really weird. It was like, yeah, but God, macOS 10 was absolutely light years ahead of what Windows was doing, and what a lot of people would say, I'll probably say it still is. And this is coming from someone that uses Windows a lot. I'm not someone that just completely abandoned Windows. I need it for gaming. The Mac has never really been able to get up to the level of Windows in terms of gaming. I'm not sure it ever will at this point, really.
I don't think it will. I don't think it should. I mean, for me,
it doesn't need to.
Yeah, I was going to say, sort of, what do you think about the Mac sort of range, or the position of the Macintosh now? So I think it's as successful as it ever have been, and
absolutely.
I can't see, I can see them carry on, making, these amazingly, amazingly good laptops, and they'll always sort of demand a premium for them. They'll always look amazing. They'll hopefully always have, the latest sort of, processors in them, and whether or not they make them themselves, as with the Apple Silicon, or will they go back to, will they go to Snapdragon, or will they go to, back to Intel or AMD, and I just think it's, at the moment, I also want to say that the Mac has become very successful, but it's lost a little bit of its, upstart, innovation. It's, would you agree with that? And
kind of, yeah. I mean, I think desktop computers and laptop computers have kind of hit like a point where they kind of do everything they need to do now. You're really just seeing, it's like we mentioned earlier that, you think of the leap from 1984 to 2005, it's like absolute different planets, because the advances are huge. But going from 2005 to 2024, a laptop from then, an Apple laptop from then, largely looks the same, as a laptop now. Yeah, I know there's not as thin and looks a bit chunkier and things like that, but they don't look like they're from different planets, really. I mean, there's plenty of Windows. I would argue that a titanium G4 looks better than a lot of current era Windows laptops, despite being 20 years older. But yeah, I think really you're probably not going to be looking to the Mac for the innovation at all, because it's just supposed to be a general purpose computer. Obviously, it's the other stuff that Apple are doing with watches and phones and Vision Pro and all that stuff is where that sort of evolution is, all that, those amazing, this is going to revolutionize computing moments will probably come from. But I think the Mac will just always be there. I mean, I really love my M2 MacBook Air. I mean, the Apple chips that are now in the desktops and the laptops, especially in the laptops. I mean, the battery life on the Air is incredible. I haven't got to charge it for 3 or 4 days.
Same here.
Been unheard of. Yeah, my Intel MacBook Air from 2020, I had to charge that daily, and that's just from medium use, But the M series chips, because they obviously derive from ARM, which are meant to be on, spent most of their lives in handhelds and various portable devices. And now we've got these super powered ones that Apple make. It's incredible, man. I can't imagine they'll need to go to Snapdragon or anything. The thing is, the Apple Silicon is it's their chips. I don't think they want to go back to where they were with, obviously when they started out, it was Motorola with the 68K, a third party providing them with chips. I think they really got burned with that kind of way of getting CPUs for your computers with the PowerPC chips, because it got to a point, around 2005, especially where they kind of were treated as a second class customer. and they weren't getting the advances in the PowerPC technology that, well, games consoles got, like these amazing chips in the Xbox 360 and the PS3. They're PowerPC. Those never saw the light of day in a Mac. The Mac was still trundling along, with single-core G4s and G5s. And the Intel chips were starting to really, completely take over. So it was the right decision at that time that they moved to Intel, because those are the chips that were... it was really the laptops where they were struggling. They couldn't shoehorn a G5 into a PowerBook, because those things needed to be absolutely not covered in liquid nitrogen to keep cool. They ran so hot you couldn't put those in a laptop, so they stalled really. So I can't imagine them wanting to go to a third party again. Whether that's who is it that does the Snapdragon? I can't remember. It's not NVIDIA.
It's not NVIDIA. No.
Or someone.
Qualcomm or I don't
someone
know.
like that. Yeah, I can't imagine they want to go back to relying on some other guys.
I was sort of thinking about you hit the nail on the head really about getting into the Apple ecosystem. Having Apple TV, having the Apple, the laptop, and then the phone, and then the watch, and everything sort of links together. Yeah. And that's sort of almost the beauty of it. And then I almost sort of contradicted myself, because I was talking about the processors, and they might go different route, but actually I think they go into, you can see the the M3 processors and the silicon range, and then I think they're going to move more. Obviously they're in the iPads, but they're going to go into into the phones, so your phone will become basically a cut down MacBook really. And I think that's really quite exciting. And it's just so, sometimes with the Mac, it's just so pleasurable how everything sort of just works together. And and sometimes you just don't get that, and I've just turned on this computer, which is a PC, and then it started doing the all the signing in rubbish about, like, it's just had an update, and do you want to sign up for Office 365? Here's a great deal. Do you want to do this? Oh God, go away. I don't want any of that. And
that's what I've been saying with how the devices that aren't the Steam Deck, like gaming PCs, you really have. I guess you will know this as well, so you've got your gaming PC stuff. How clunky the experience is versus a games console or even a Mac, because you'd be playing a game and then it's full screen, but then you get kicked out of the full screen because Windows wants to tell you that it's about to start raining with one of its notifications. And
honestly,
turn off a ton of from Skype from saying you need to sign up to the trial or Teams and everything. I mean, it's a general purpose OS, so I guess it's doing what it's supposed to do. But it's just all of that stuff is so clunky and annoying. And even though Mac OS is a general purpose OS, it doesn't do any of that. And that's why gaming, especially the handhelds, the Legion Go and the ROG Ally, you have to fight all of that stuff to really get a good experience. And it's just for people like us, we'll kind of deal with it, won't we? But a lot of people don't want that. A lot of people don't want that really in just day-to-day computing, and I don't, which is why Mac OS is so much nicer to use.
Well,
a lot of people will say
go ahead.
A lot of people will say, well, you're a mug for spending, way more money than you can get a £200 Chromebook to write your Word documents, to do your email. But no, because they're like, they're clunky and bad, and I'm happy to pay that extra cash, to get an experience that makes me feel like I'm at home, So that's why and Apple are great at that. So yeah.
Well, I think my final point really on it is, you hit the nail on the head about how simple it is to use the operating system. That's what Mac is now. And things like the PC, and I'm always sort of Googling, how do I get this to work? How do I do this? How do I do that? Oh, I had this error. And then it says, oh, press this and press that. Oh, and then you solve it. Go into the BIOS and do that. And it's You're absolutely right. It's still not as easy to use as a Mac. And I have to admit, I think I've had conversations on here before with yourself and Al, was what are the button combinations to do this? How do I take a screen grab? And, there are different button combinations that you've got to learn. But once you know those, you're flying.
Yeah, I think so. I think they've probably grown further away in some ways, haven't they, Windows and macOS? They're, with the amount of junk that Windows tries to hit you with as soon as you log in. Yeah, all that stuff. And now it wants you to do Copilot, and now it's going to start taking screenshots all the time when you're using it, and all this weird, creepy AI stuff. I'm sure Apple are going to obviously shove some of that in macOS, but in a more useful, elegant way. macOS, you log in, you just land at your desktop. That's it. You're just there. You're ready to go. You can then pick what you want to do from that point. Yeah, there's little notification things that can fly in from the left, and you can have gadgets on the screen. But a lot of that stuff you kind of tell it to set up or tell it to do, or you can just completely ignore it. I mean, I don't really. The notifications I just get, it just tells me that I've got an email, which I find actually useful. I'm happy with that. I don't have it tell me, or get Siri to announce things to me, but there's plenty of people that love that stuff. So yeah, it could be as naggy as you want it to be, or not, or it can get out of your. But it starts off by trying to get out of your way, whereas Windows, it's in your face straight away, and you've got to tell it to stop nagging you. And that already just means the Mac will always be the winner for me. Hopefully for the foreseeable future, and hopefully forever. Although Apple have struggled in the past before, but. Well, here we are, in 2024, and they're bigger than they ever have been, and still getting bigger. So here's hoping, in another 20 years, we'll be able to do another episode and see where the Mac is at that point. Hopefully still thriving, and with, maybe the Vision Pro will become part of a bit more, I would think in that time it'll be a lot more integrated into the Apple ecosystem, and maybe you'll be able to get one of them for a few £100, and it'll be absolutely stunning. But that's something to talk about in the 60th anniversary of the Mac, or, that's
exactly
quite a way away. But I'm sure Apple will still be around for it. So, Stu, where can you find us on the internet?
Oh, we're everywhere. So you can find us on YouTube, search Console Shock. You can find us on Facebook, search Console Shock. We're on Twitter, search Console Shock. And we're on any podcast client. Again, search Console Shock and you'll find us.
Cool. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed our 40th anniversary of the Mac episode. Happy birthday to everybody's Mac out there that are using them. Hopefully you'll get your Mac a little gift for its birthday or for the brand's birthday. And take care, everybody, and we'll catch you in the next one. See you later.
Take it easy. Bye-bye.